That particular series of films was called the American Film Theater.
In 1990, Remick was supposed to be dying. Doctors said her cancer was too advanced, but she wasn't ready to give up. She took one last role in Russia, working alongside the mysterious Maximilian Schell. During those cold nights in Leningrad, something happened between them. Her private diary tells a story that no one expected. The words she wrote about Schell were so personal, so raw, that her family tried to keep them hidden. But the truth always finds a way out. In 1942, Remick was 7 years old when her world shattered. She had grown up in Quincy, Massachusetts, in a home that seemed perfect. Her father, Francis Edwin Frank Remick, was a Harvard-educated clothier who owned Remick's department store. The family had comfort, stability, and the feeling that life was secure. Then came the divorce. Back then, such a split carried deep social shame and often left women with nothing. The separation tore the family apart, leaving Lee old enough to feel the loss, but too young to understand it. That moment marked her forever, shaping her uneasy relationship with stability and commitment. Years later, those wounds would echo in the troubled women she played on screen. After the divorce, Lee's mother was left alone with 2 children, Lee and her older brother Bruce. It was the 1940s. Single mothers had almost no safety net. Gertrude had once been a stage actress, but acting did not guarantee steady work, and she had little else to rely on. She packed up their lives in Quincy and moved to New York City. It was a fall from comfort to near poverty. Every day was a fight to survive. She auditioned for roles against thousands of other hopefuls, while trying to create some kind of stability for her children. Money was so tight that sending Lee to an elite private school took enormous sacrifice, and perhaps help from relatives or benefactors. Watching her mother struggle left a deep mark on Lee. She learned to be fiercely independent, but also developed a fear of financial insecurity that would push her to work relentlessly in her career. In Manhattan, Lee attended Miss Hewitt's classes, one of the most exclusive girls' schools in the city. It was the early 1940s, and her classmates were the daughters of wealthy industrialists, politicians, and socialites. They spoke casually about summers in the Hamptons and vacations in Europe. Lee's reality was very different. She lived with the constant worry of money running out. The school's address, 45 East 75th Street, placed it right in the heart of wealth, near the famous Frick collection. But for Lee, it was a world she could see but never truly join. She was likely on reduced tuition or scholarship, which only highlighted her outsider status. That feeling of being caught between 2 worlds would later give her a rare depth when playing characters trapped between social classes. Around this time, Lee trained in ballet at the Swoboda School of Dance under Maria Swoboda, a former member of the Bolshoi Ballet. Swoboda was a demanding teacher, and her Russian methods were brutal. Lee practiced for hours, pushing her body past its limits. She danced until her feet bled, until her point shoes were soaked in red, but she never stopped. The training was not just about steps. It demanded emotional truth through movement. Lee's obsession with perfection became a kind of survival. The discipline she learned there would stay with her, serving her well in Hollywood when she endured stunts, grueling conditions, and long shoots without complaint. There was another, stranger piece of her family story. Lee's maternal great-grandmother, Eliza Duffield, had been an English-born preacher in Round Hill, New York, something almost unheard of for a woman at the time. She founded her own congregation, defying both religious and social expectations. This legacy of moral authority and rebellion left its mark on Lee, who often played women torn between desire and duty, as in Days of Wine and Roses and Anatomy of a Murder. By 1952, Lee was 17 and desperate to break into show business. When she saw an ad for dancers at the Music Circus in Hyannis, Massachusetts, she lied about her age to qualify. It was a dangerous gamble. If anyone had found out she was still a student at Miss Hewitt's, it could have ended her career before it began. But she got the job, fooling seasoned professionals and setting her career in motion. A year later, she made her Broadway debut in Be Your Age. It was a disaster. The play opened on January 14, 1953, and closed 4 days later, after only 5 performances. The failure was crushing, and she nearly lost her place at Miss Hewitt's, because students were not allowed to work in professional productions during the school year. After much debate, the school let her stay. Ironically, the flop led her to an agent and new auditions. Her real turning point came in May 1956. She was performing in All Expenses Paid on Robert Montgomery Presents when Elia Kazan happened to be watching television. He wasn't looking for talent, but something about her caught his attention. That chance moment changed everything. He cast her in A Face in the Crowd, 1957, choosing her over established Hollywood names. A risky move for a director, fresh off the success of On the Waterfront. To prepare for her role, Lee went to Arkansas 3 weeks before filming. She lived with a local family, trained with high school majorettes, and practiced baton twirling until she could perform with 60 local girls. Filming involved 5,000 extras in the August heat, each earning $1 an hour. By the time the cameras rolled, Lee didn't just play a Southern majorette, she had become one. Lee Remick's rise in Hollywood was as fast as it was complicated. After her breakout in A Face in the Crowd, the studio moved quickly to secure her. 20th Century Fox offered her a 7-year contract that looked generous on paper, about $1,700 for every 10-week shooting period, which would be close to $180,000 today. But the contract came with heavy restrictions. She could only make 1 film a year for Fox, and they alone decided which roles she would play. More often than not, she was pushed into formulaic Southern belle parts that showed off her blonde hair and blue eyes, but did little for her range as an actress. Important directors like Billy Wilder and John Huston had wanted to cast her, but Fox's exclusivity clause shut the door on those opportunities. Over time, she began to feel trapped. That same year, on August 3, 1957, she made a personal decision that would add to that sense of confinement. At just 21, she married TV director William Arthur Colleran. He had credits on Your Hit Parade, The Dean Martin Show, and The Judy Garland Show. It seemed romantic, but friends later called it a bad match. He was controlling, she was ambitious, and their worlds clashed. They had 2 children, Catherine in January 1959, and Matthew in June 1961. But the marriage grew tense. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper reported on their public arguments at Hollywood parties. By 1965, Remick was telling friends she felt she was living in 2 prisons, her Fox contract and her marriage. The divorce came in November 1968, dragging on into 1969 with custody and money disputes. Work brought its own battles. In the long hot summer in 1958, she played Eula Varner alongside Orson Welles and Paul Newman. Filming began in Louisiana in September 1957 with a budget of $1,245,000, but the set quickly turned chaotic. Welles had taken the role mainly to pay off a $150,000 tax debt, and he often clashed with director Martin Ritt. Arguments would last for hours, holding up production. Welles showed up late, skipped learning his lines, and sometimes played mind games with the cast. Remick, still young and in awe of his reputation, found him intimidating. One day, during an intense scene, Welles crossed a line with inappropriate advances, leaving her in tears. The incident was quietly buried by the studio, but it chipped away at her trust in Hollywood. A year later, she faced Otto Preminger on Anatomy of a Murder. He was famous for his temper, for screaming at actors, for tearing down even seasoned performers. Lana Turner had been cast first, but left after a fight over costumes. Columbia Pictures worried they couldn't find anyone to work with Preminger. Remick took the part, and to everyone's surprise, she was the one actress who wouldn't break under his fury. She learned every line, hers and everyone else's, so she was always prepared. When Preminger erupted over lighting or makeup, she met him with a calm stare and measured answers. Over time, he respected her for it. James Stewart even joked she had civilized Otto. That film also gave her one of her most famous moments. In a courtroom scene, her character, Laura Magnon, slowly removed her glasses and shook her hair loose while on the witness stand. The moment was both vulnerable and suggestive, and critics called it electric. Some censorship boards tried to cut it. The performance kept audiences guessing. Was she a true victim or manipulating the jury? Remick said she drew on Marilyn Monroe's softness and Lauren Bacall's confidence to create that balance. Her role in Anatomy of a Murder came about because of the wardrobe fight with Lana Turner, but it turned her into a star. She was only 24, and though the film was black and white, critics swore her red hair, blue eyes, and pale skin seemed to glow on screen. Studios loved this and started putting her in roles that leaned on her sensuality, which over time frustrated her. In Wild River in 1960, she worked with Montgomery Clift, who had been badly injured in a car accident years earlier. She described him as like a wounded bird and admitted she wanted to take care of him. This wasn't simple attraction. She was witnessing the slow decline of a gifted actor. The experience taught her that great acting often came from showing real fragility, and it stayed with her. As the 1960s went on, she became disillusioned with Hollywood. She once said, "I make movies for grown-ups. When Hollywood starts making them again, I'll start acting in them again." She was tired of scripts that treated women as decoration. She even complained that 54 million people watched the Beverly Hillbillies, while the same number couldn't be bothered to vote. For her, it wasn't just about art, it was about what America valued. She often said her truest performance was in Wild River. Under director Elia Kazan, it became her personal benchmark. Every role after that was measured against it, and that made her choosy. The film was praised, even selected for the Library of Congress National Film Registry in 2002. But it wasn't a big box office hit. That didn't matter to her. What mattered was that it was honest. Lee Remick's role in Days of Wine and Roses was more than acting. It was a journey into the darkest corners of human weakness. She and Jack Lemmon didn't just read about alcoholics. They sat in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, listening to real people talk about their battles. Lemmon went further. He spent nights at the Lincoln Heights jail, watching men in the drunk tank shake and scream through delirium tremens. He later said it was frightening, like watching people trapped in their own private hell. Their research was so real that Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA, became the film's technical advisor. Scenes were rewritten. Instead of characters waking up casually in cells, they were strapped to real dry-out tables, exactly as it happened in life. The immersion took its toll. Even after filming ended, both Lemmon and Remick went back to AA, not because they were alcoholics, but because what they'd lived through on screen had changed the way they saw drinking. Blake Edwards, the director, quit alcohol entirely within a year. Lemmon's performance was loud, violent, and unflinching. His breakdowns were raw and frightening. Remick's was different. Her descent was quiet, slow, and devastating. She began as a woman who didn't drink at all, politely refusing when offered alcohol. But Joe handed her a Brandy Alexander one night, and she admitted it made her feel good. That small moment became the first step toward ruin. By the end, she was drunk while her daughter was in the apartment as a fire broke out. She picked up strangers in bars, and still she denied she was an alcoholic, even as she admitted she couldn't stop drinking. It was heartbreak wrapped in denial, and she played every note with precision. The first audiences couldn't handle it. At a Warner Brothers preview screening, around 40 couples walked out. The studio panicked, thinking the movie was doomed. They later realized the ads had made it look like a light-hearted Jack Lemmon comedy. Viewers had shown up expecting laughs, not the slow destruction of a family. But when the marketing was fixed and the film was released nationwide, critics praised it. Word of mouth spread, and it earned $4 million in rentals in the United States and Canada, from a total gross of $8.1 million. It was the 14th highest grossing film of 1962. That year, the film received 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Actress for Remick and Best Actor for Lemmon. Only the song won. Remick lost to Anne Bancroft for The Miracle Worker. It was her first and last Oscar nomination. Critics called her work brilliant and controlled, but that didn't change the fact that her only shot at the Academy Award was gone. 2 years later, she debuted on Broadway in Stephen Sondheim's Anyone Can Whistle. It was a satire about conformity and madness, staged at the Majestic Theater. The production had 2 Hollywood stars making their musical debuts, Remick and Angela Lansbury, but it was doomed. Investors thought it was too strange. After 12 previews, it opened on April 4th, 1964, and closed 9 performances later. Despite the flop, Remick's singing drew praise, and the score became a Sondheim classic. In 1966, she returned to Broadway in Wait Until Dark, playing a blind woman terrorized by criminals. Directed by Arthur Penn and co-starring Robert Duvall, it ran for 373 performances and earned her a Tony nomination. She learned to move like someone without sight, and audiences held their breath as she turned the tables on her attackers in the dark. The play's success later led to the 1967 film with Audrey Hepburn. Offstage, she was learning how Hollywood really worked. In an interview with Joe Hyams of the New York Herald Tribune, she admitted that everyone in the industry told her she had to develop a fake interview personality to keep the press happy. She said being a lady wasn't encouraged, and that she was expected to be quick, glib, and full of colorful quotes. One of those moments came when Hyams asked her for a funny or controversial remark. She resisted, then grinned and said, "You can compare me with Greta Garbo. I have big feet too." The line became famous, a small but clever jab at the idea of glamour. In 1968, Lee Remick should have been stepping into the brightest chapter of her career. She had the lead female role in a major film opposite Frank Sinatra. The movie was called The Detective, and it wasn't just another crime drama. It was bold. It tackled subjects that Hollywood had barely whispered about: homosexuality, police corruption, sexual violence. Remick played Karen Leland, a troubled woman whose marriage to Sinatra's detective character was crumbling. She wasn't the glamorous starlet here. She was raw, flawed, and painfully human. The film came out just after the end of the strict Hays Code, and it pushed every boundary it could. But instead of making her an A-list star, it nearly destroyed her. Karen Leland was described as practically a nymphomaniac. She cheated compulsively, and her sexual dysfunction was shown with a bluntness that shocked audiences expecting a neat, polished Sinatra picture. Hollywood executives, still clinging to conservative ideas in the late 60s, didn't like it. The movie didn't do well at the box office, and when people talked about it, they didn't praise her bravery. They called the role too much and too ugly. Then came the scene that changed everything. It was meant to be the emotional heart of the film. Karen confessing her compulsions, breaking down in front of her husband. Remick poured herself into it. She gave it everything. But when test audiences saw it, something awful happened. They laughed. Not everyone, but enough for her to hear it. The moment she had imagined as tragic came across as overblown to people who weren't ready for that kind of realism. Some even walked out. That laughter stayed with her for years. She'd later admit it made her question whether she was good enough to keep acting. A few years earlier, in 1963, she had already faced one of her worst professional experiences working with British actor Lawrence Harvey in The Running Man. Harvey had a reputation: cold, arrogant, and impossible to work with. On set, he lived up to it. He upstaged co-stars, demanded changes that favored his character, and treated people with condescension. Remick later said, "The tales I can tell of working with him are too horrendous to repeat." For her, who was usually diplomatic, that was a lot. Hollywood in the 1960s was a strange battlefield. Publicly, the movies were starting to break rules: show more, say more. But behind the scenes, the industry was still run by powerful studio moguls who liked things safe and conservative. They valued loyalty, networking, and politics over artistic risk. Many were deeply suspicious of actors who seemed too progressive or who didn't play the game. Remick didn't have the instincts for that world. She was honest, straightforward. She didn't know how to cozy up to the right people. And when The Detective failed, she didn't have the allies she needed to protect her. Director Elia Kazan once told her she didn't have claws, and she agreed. Her own words revealed the truth. "I don't quite know what stardom means," she once said. "I suppose it means power, basically, and I'm not good at that." She preferred to think of herself as really a housewife who is incidentally an actress. In a world where stars like Elizabeth Taylor were masters at playing the game, that attitude kept her on the outside. Her personal life was no less complicated. She married television producer William Colleran in 1957 after a one-year courtship. They had 2 children, Catherine, born in 1959, and Matthew, born in 1961. Colleran was successful in his own right, producing shows like Your Hit Parade and The Dean Martin Show. But as Remick's career grew, so did the distance between them. By the late 60s, the marriage was falling apart. They divorced in 1968 after 11 years. Then came the scandal that would follow her for decades. In the late 60s, she began a relationship with Kip Gowans, a British assistant director who was married to actress Valerie Guerin. Gowans had 2 daughters, and until then, had been seen as a respectable family man. When the affair became public during Gowans' divorce proceedings in 1970, it was explosive. British newspapers had a field day. In court, Remick was officially named as the other woman. The New York Times even ran the story. It was humiliating, and in the eyes of Hollywood, it was damning. Only 6 months after the divorce, Remick and Gowans married in a small, secret ceremony in December 1970. The backlash was immediate. People whispered that she should have waited a year. Studios started to pull away, worried that her image might hurt ticket sales. So she made a choice. She left Hollywood. She and Gowans moved to England and bought a home in St. John's Wood, London. The move shocked everyone. She was walking away from a contract with 20th Century Fox and turning down major roles. Some thought she was running from judgment. Others believed it was pure love. In England, she worked steadily in television and film, winning awards for roles like Jenny, Lady Randolph Churchill in 1974. Gowans often produced her projects, but even with the success, the shadow of the scandal never fully disappeared. In 1989, Lee Remick was in France filming a television movie when her life changed in a single moment. She had been feeling tired for 6 weeks, certain it was just the tail end of the flu. She was back at her Cape Cod home, planning her daughter's wedding, when doctors gave her the truth. It wasn't the flu, it was kidney cancer, and it had already spread to her lungs. Surgery was no longer possible. The disease had moved too far, too fast. She later described that moment in simple, haunting words. "It came as a thunderbolt," she said. Her husband was in Hollywood. She was alone, juggling wedding plans and fatigue she didn't understand. The joy of that time was instantly replaced with fear. There was no time to waste. She returned to Los Angeles and sought out one of the best oncologists she knew. She didn't panic. She didn't crumble. "You fight," she told herself. At the National Institutes of Health in Maryland, she began an intense new form of immunotherapy, a treatment meant to supercharge her white blood cells and force them to attack the cancer. It was cutting edge for 1990, still experimental, and it was grueling. A week of therapy, 10 days to recover, then another week. She admitted it was painful. Others called it drastic, but it worked. By the spring of 1990, she was well enough to return to acting. She traveled to the Soviet Union to film The Young Catherine, alongside Vanessa Redgrave, Maximilian Schell, and Christopher Plummer. She played a manipulative mother in a sprawling historical epic, shooting in Leningrad while still recovering from her fight with cancer. Her comeback was brief but powerful. In 1990, she took the stage in Beverly Hills for the long-running play Love Letters with Tom Skerritt. The show was simple, just 2 actors reading letters across decades of love and loss, but it resonated deeply with her. It would be her last stage performance. In April 1991, she appeared on Hollywood Boulevard to receive her Walk of Fame star. She was frail, almost unrecognizable, but her eyes still lit up when she saw her old friend Jack Lemmon. She told him, "You never failed me, Jack." A week later, she attended a Winston Churchill Society ceremony aboard the Queen Mary, where Gregory Peck presented her with an award. She was pale and weary, but gracious. Watching a clip from her 1974 role as Lady Randolph Churchill, she quietly said, "I was beautiful then." On July 2, 1991, at 5:15 in the evening, Lee Remick died at her Brentwood home. She was 55. Her mother, husband, children, and stepchildren were there. In her final months, she had stopped aggressive treatments, choosing instead to stay comfortable at home. At her funeral, Jack Lemmon and Gregory Peck spoke, and her children sang "Anyone Can Whistle," a song she once performed on Broadway. Her career could have taken other turns. She once refused the title role in a film about Jean Harlow because she disliked the script. She was chosen to replace Marilyn Monroe in Something's Got to Give, but lost the part when Dean Martin refused to work with anyone but Monroe. Yet her legacy wasn't built on the roles she didn't take. It was built on the depth and honesty she brought to the ones she did. 7 Emmy nominations, an Oscar nomination, and the Women in Film Crystal Award were testaments to her craft. In the end, Lee Remick's story wasn't just about the roles or the accolades. It was about grace under fire, the will to work when her body said stop, and the quiet dignity with which she faced the last chapter of her life.